Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Mr. Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. Now, with no further ado, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey. Good evening from Israel. Well, we had a bit of a bombshell tonight, not entirely unexpected, and we talked about that last week, and I said how it was increasingly likely, but Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, at least for another 24 hours or so, 26 hours, let's say, has decided that he will not run in the upcoming elections. He did hint that this is not the end of him politically. He's relatively young, I believe 50 years old, so I am certain that he'll be back. I talked about it last week, and I talked about it with a number of people throughout Israeli politics, that certainly it's the best decision for him. It's very hard at the moment, after only a year being prime minister, to look at successes. He was, really browbeaten by the opposition into supporting the end of the tenure, supporting the dispersal of the current Knesset. And usually in these types of things, in the future, people will look back on it far more fondly than they do at the moment. And I think the time will be right at some point in the relatively near future that Naftali Bennett will make a comeback. I think people will look at some of the achievements in a less harsh light, let's say. And I think he'll be able to make something of a comeback. I don't think he'll necessarily come back to the position that he holds at this point, the prime ministership. One never knows, and there's lots of things that can happen, but certainly at this point in time, he's made the best decision, I believe, politically, strategically. I think he probably himself feels that he needs a break. I'm sure his family do. So it's clear that he will not be running. Now, what does that mean? That does shake things up significantly. It's already clear that his long-standing partner, number two, sometimes in the past was even number one, is Ayelet Shaked, the Minister of Interior. She was, up until a couple of years ago, until all these sort of elections, she was the rising star of Israeli politics. People are talking about her as a future prime minister, possible leader of the Likud, certainly in a post-Netanyahu scenario. But certainly her star has fallen over the last couple of years, and over the last year, she has taken very much a backseat. She probably was even less comfortable in this coalition than Naftali Bennett was. She's more of a politician than Bennett. She's more looks to the future. She felt probably less comfortable. She didn't come out as often as obviously the prime minister had to. So I think that she'll be tainted a little bit quite a lot by this government, but not as much as if Bennett was running Yamina. But what is most significant, I think, tonight is that this has certainly been a very good moment for former Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, because what this does is Naftali Bennett, I think, would have found it very difficult, not impossible, very difficult to have sit with Netanyahu after the next elections. Again, not impossible, but he said he wouldn't sit with him. But as we know, as Netanyahu himself has said, Bennett said all sorts of things we wouldn't sit with, and in the end, he ended up sitting with him. But Ayelet Shaked has never made such statements, and in fact has said repeatedly, especially in the last few days or few weeks, that she would conceivably sit under Netanyahu, and certainly she would feel far more comfortable. I don't see Shaked would have done what Bennett did, and I think that it's very likely that she would sit under Netanyahu. So this whole tabulation for the last year between government and opposition, and whether opposition, which, as we've spoke about, is rising steadily towards that hallowed 61, hasn't reached it. And, there were polls of anything from 57 to 60, depending who passed the electoral threshold Now the numbers are far more attractive to Netanyahu because I think he can not 100%, but can rely on whatever Ayelet Shaked brings, if she brings, according to a snap poll, which they did this evening after it's clear that Bennett decided not to run. It shows that Shaked would get 5 seats. And Shaked was obviously pleased enough with that she tweeted it and said, we're on our way. So those 5 seats are now really up for grabs. It's unlikely, I would say it's far more likely that those 5 seats, if indeed it becomes 5 seats after the elections or whatever it may be, 4 to whatever happens, is probably more likely to be in the Netanyahu column. It won't be easy negotiations because she'll make the point that she can sit with the other side, but certainly Netanyahu feel far more confident about making his 61 or more with Ayelet Shaked now leading the Yamina party. What happens with the rest of the Yamina party is also now thrown into doubt because it's a party without members. We've seen Shikli, Michal Shikli, get thrown out of the party, after he refused to go to the government even for one day. We've seen Edith Zillman leave. We've seen Nir Orbach travel across the aisle. So they're probably, the two of them are going to be in Likud. And Michal Shikli, as he was designated as a deserter to the party, will not be able to run with an existing party. That means he will not be able to return to Yamina or run with the Likud. And I think that's something that also favors Netanyahu, although that's less relevant now that Bennett is not going to run. Other people in the party, Matan Kahana, the current Minister of Religious Affairs, who is very loyal to Bennett and is less, let's say, close to Ayelet Shaked, and certainly is someone who would prefer, let's say, some of the parties on the more liberal side than some of the more ultra-conservative on the right. It's suggested that he may well run with Benny Gantz. There's Kara, who it's been suggested may well run with Yisrael Beitenu. Shirley Pinto, the other member of Knesset at the moment, it's not sure what happened with her. So what does seem clear is Ayelet Shaked pretty much will have a blank slate. And whether she can fill it with names, with people that will attract or re-attract people to Yamina is an open question. What is also interesting is, again, according to most of the polls, they didn't do a deep dive in tonight's Snap poll, but up until that moment, it seemed that most of Yamina voters, or voters who those who said that they would vote if elections were held today, are people more on the center left, people who certainly would not be happy sitting in a Bibi-led coalition. So the question is, can Shaked keep them? Does she want to keep them? Does she want to use them as a base and try and attract more? Or will she just go straight back and say, we're now a right-wing party. We will sit with Netanyahu. We will sit with Smotrich. We will sit with the ultra-Orthodox. And then she'll pretty much have to start again to try and build a base. Those are decisions for her and her strategist in the days ahead. And I think a lot will depend on what figures she's able to attract to Yamina, because sometimes that can create quite a lot of buzz. So it's daunting on the one hand, but it's also, for her, she can really build a party. She can step finally out of the shadows, from the shadows of Naftali Bennett, and really build a party in her own image. And don't forget, she was always an outlier to a certain extent in a religious Zionist party when she herself is secular. So it will be certainly interesting to see what happens. In the Knesset, at the moment, we're still waiting for that final second and third readings, which take place one after the other. We're waiting for the dispersal of Knesset law to pass. Now, many of the MKs have been told to go home, that vote will only take place at 8 o'clock in the morning, when it was expected to happen during today, or even some thought yesterday. Why was it delayed? Well, usually when the dispersal of Knesset law is it's on its way, there's usually some sort of negotiation between the coalition opposition, which laws will try and hurry through before the dispersal of Knesset, because as soon as that passes its third reading, the Knesset immediately dissolves and no more laws can be passed. There's a lot of laws which are waiting for its final readings, which have been subject to debate. The most important ones that are on the agenda are what's been called the Metro Law, which is something pushed very strongly by Transportation Minister Merav Michaeli, which is to create the bureaucratic infrastructure to create a very large metro underground system, which will encompass pretty much the whole central area where around 80% of Israelis live. Anyone who's been to Tel Aviv and its environs recently will have seen the crazy traffic. One of the ways to solve it is to build this underground system. Now, it's something that's been in the works for a while. This law is important because it allows for a lot of the bureaucratic obstacles to be pushed aside, and it will come down a lot cheaper, save the country billions of shekels. Well, at the moment, the opposition doesn't want to give Michaeli, doesn't want to give the government that achievement. The other law, which they're trying to push through, is a law, actually, ironically, of Ayelet Shaked's, which is also to create the infrastructure to allow Israel to enter the visa waiver, the US visa waiver program. At the moment, Israel is one of those countries that have to apply for a visa to travel to the US, but there is a visa waiver system, which the UK, Europe, and others, meaning their citizens can travel to the US without applying for a visa, is something that Israel has tried to do for a long time. The US has put certain stipulations, as it does for all countries in the program. They have to share certain information about its citizens, et cetera, and it's something the Ayelet Shaked prepared, and they wanted to pass through. It got to a point where the ambassador of the US, which is certainly a unique event that a foreign ambassador gets involved in domestic politics, but obviously this is something very relevant, actually wrote an open letter to all the members of Knesset saying, this is something we really want to do. Please don't let it come down to politics. I would assume that the reason that the ambassador got involved so vocally and publicly is because it's probably something that President Biden would like to mention or publicly declare while he is in Israel in a couple of weeks. So those two laws are basically being held up by the opposition and even members of the coalition. Yisrael Beiteinu's leader, Avigdor Lieberman, basically so enraged by the fact that the Metro Law was not put in the column of those laws, that there was an agreement by both the opposition and coalition, that he put up a number of sort of appeals, because every law you can put up an appeal. Sometimes, a filibuster, you can put up thousands. The Joint Arab List put up, I believe, 10,000 detailed, well, maybe not so detailed, but appeals to the dispersal of Knesset law. Their reasoning was to try and delay the dispersal of Knesset till after Thursday midnight. And as we know, that will be the 1st of July, and the law governing Israeli citizens over the Green Line in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, will expire, and that creates a very complicated and complex legal system, because those Israelis who live over the Green Line will no longer be treated as equal citizens of the State of Israel as far as everything. And it's a debate whether Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who lives over the Green Line, or a member of Knesset Bezalel Smotrich, who lives over the Green Line, will be able to serve in their positions. And many, many, many other complications with security prisoners. Palestinian security prisoners will no longer be under the jurisdiction of Israel. It creates a very complicated system. The Arab Joint List obviously want to embarrass the State of Israel, but at the moment, those particular issues are being dealt with. But Yisrael Beitenu and others are trying to push through the Metro Law, but we'll have to see what happens with that. On the other side, what do the opposition want? The opposition really are making sure that the coalition doesn't get as many achievements, even if they're important for the country. But also something that's very important to them is the date of the election. Now, that's something usually haggled and agreed between the two groups, depending on what cards each have to play. The coalition wants it to be as late as possible. The suggestions are simply to give Yair Lapid as much time in the Prime Minister's office as possible, and they're looking at the 11th of November. But the opposition want October the 25th, and they are pushing very hard, and they're basically saying, if you give us this, we will pass all those important laws, the Metro Law, the US visa waiver law, and all these there's actually a few other very important laws. And they are saying, all you have to do is give us that date. Now, why are they pushing so hard for that date? Because that date is very important for their bloc, because yeshiva students haven't yet gone back to yeshiva, the ultra-Orthodox yeshivot, at that date, because it's still the holiday or the vacation from the Jewish holidays, which will take place mostly in October. So they want to take advantage of that, because they feel, with some truth to it, that if yeshiva students are on vacation, then they're more likely to be involved in campaigns, to get to the streets, and obviously to vote. So for them, it's very important that they have that date, because then their bloc can be as large as possible, and they're holding up hostage all these other laws, which are very important for the country, to ensure that they get the vote out on October the 25th. It could be, in the end, October 25th will be the date. Probably what's as likely is it will be the date between October 25th and November 11th. And those negotiations are still going on. The fact that it's been put off until tomorrow morning, the disposal of Knesset law, is basically just to see if there can be any last-minute breakthroughs on any of these issues. The idea of an alternate government is pretty much off the table, as it was, I believe, even last week. Benny Gantz is not coming, Gideon Sa'ar is not coming. So really, Netanyahu has no real chance to secure the 61. That's not to say that Yair Lapid isn't getting uneasy, and that's the reason why he wants to push the disposal of Knesset law as soon as possible. But it does seem that the law are scheduled to be voted at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, which means that Yair Lapid will only become prime minister at 12 o'clock between Thursday night and Friday night. Probably the official ceremony will only take place on Sunday. But there's been quite a lot of drama, and we haven't even officially gone to elections yet. So some fascinating weeks and months ahead of us. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on these issues or anything else.
Thank you so much. We have some good questions coming in. Carrie Hillebrand asked, with the ongoing development and expansion of the light rail, is the proposed metro really needed in addition, or would it be worth the estimated cost and inevitable cost overruns?
As I said, I mean, I don't know the exact details of it, but anyone who's been to Tel Aviv and its environs recently will know how, the traffic is ridiculous, especially on the connecting roads between the cities, the neighborhoods, the towns around them. Most modern cities sometimes will have a combination of the light railway and above ground. But again, underground systems are extremely important, simply because they won't take up any traffic overground. Light railway systems obviously take up quite a lot of the roads, take a lot of the traffic. Some roads will not be able to, will not be able to have cars go on it. So I don't know exactly. What I do know is also the light railway is only in Tel Aviv itself. I think maybe Ramat Gan, whereas this is I saw a map of it. It's going to be much, much wider, really going across that central region, all the way to Ra'anana, to Kfar Saba in the east. I think Netanya in the north, and also it goes quite south. Maybe even one day it will meet up with Modi'in and places like that. So no, this is probably what's been suggested as the biggest infrastructure project in the history of Israel. It won't be completed, they say, before, I think, 2033 is something that I saw. So it's a 10-year project. It's already on the way. It's already started. So it's not to say that the lack of this passage will stop the whole project, but it will make it more expensive, more less cost effective and less time effective. So it's an important law, and we'll have to see what can be negotiated in the coming hours to see if it will pass.
Thank you. Len Getz, I know you just said that an alternative government is probably off the table, but Len Getz said, I read that Ayelet Shaked said, give me a week and I will form a new government. Does that mean that a new government can be formed without going to elections?
I didn't hear that recently. It could be she said that a week ago behind closed doors. Certainly she was part of negotiations, and as we said many times over previous weeks, that there were a number of Yamina members of Knesset who could conceivably move across. But again, even if the whole of Yamina moved across, that would still leave Netanyahu shy of his 61. So he would still need, I don't know the exact numbers, 1 or 2 or 3 more. And the only likelihoods are within the Blue and White Party led by Benny Gantz or the New Hope Party led by Gideon Sa'ar. So I never saw, I didn't see that it was a very likely scenario. It's always a possible scenario, and who knows it. That, 1 hour is a long time in Israeli politics, so I can't. No one can ever say 100% sure. But I think it was extremely unlikely. There were lots of negotiations going on, but it was always extremely unlikely, and it needs more than Yael Sheked, and regardless of her powers of persuasion. Benny Gantz said he will not sit under Netanyahu, and Gideon Sa'ar said he will not sit under Netanyahu. So at the moment, the numbers are just not there.
Thank you. I know you did talk about this already, and I might have missed your answer, but Eric asked, will Parliament pass the legislation extending the Israeli law to the West Bank settlers, or will it expire at the end of the month?
It's almost certain that they will not pass it, but what does happen is with the dispersal of Knesset law, it basically freezes the situation as is until after a new government will be formed. So that's a way of sort of dealing with it. If the dispersal of Knesset law does pass tomorrow by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, then it won't become an issue. If they do not, then we could be in a very complicated and complex legal scenario, especially for those, around 500,000 Israelis who live over the Green Line and not in Jerusalem.
Thank you. Eric also follows up, if Netanyahu becomes prime minister again, what changes would he make compared to the current government?
Well, that's a very broad question. It's very difficult to say. First of all, because there are a lot of promises made when someone is in opposition or when it's a campaign time, and whether they realize, we've seen in the past that Netanyahu has promised before at least one of the elections that he will apply Israeli sovereignty to the territories over the Green Line, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, which are not sovereign Israeli territory. Israel's never applied its sovereignty. But we saw when he came into office that there was no real serious attempt to do so. I think we should take a pinch of salt. Regardless of what Netanyahu himself and many leaders of the opposition have claimed, there are markedly different policies on a host of issues between the current government and what would be the opposition. On issues like religion and state, certainly this government went further than Netanyahu's government would, simply because it needs the ultra-Orthodox to maintain stability. But on issues of security, I'm not sure that there would be that much different. One could certainly argue, contrary to what Netanyahu claims, that this government actually fought terror far more robustly than the previous one. There was one rocket in a whole year. The Jerusalem flag parade went forward as opposed to the previous year. They were making arrests of terrorists almost nightly. They were fighting Iran, as Naftali Bennett said, we're not just fighting the tentacles. Naftali Bennett's claim, even today in his sort of departure speech, said, the different policies which I dictated is we didn't just go for the tentacles, the octopus, we went for the head. And there's certainly, I'm sure more will come out over the years, but there's certainly already some evidence to suggest that was fought far more robustly. One could argue that this government fought the JCPOA more robustly, perhaps even more successfully. I mean, the jury's still out, and now it remains to be seen whether there will be a new Iran deal. But don't forget, under Netanyahu, the JCPOA was signed, even though Netanyahu fought a very hard battle against it, including in Congress and around the world, and in the end failed to prevent it. Bennett took a completely different strategy, and so far negotiations are stalled. Economically, the situation in Israel, like in many places around the world, is not great. The cost of living is rising. you could argue that in line with many other OECD countries, Israel's doing relatively well economically, but that doesn't matter for the person on the street who just sees that as of tomorrow, the price of gas, petrol will go up significantly. The cost of electricity will go up. Their shopping basket has gone up. So, the Israeli public will believe anyone who will tell them that this was a disastrous government economically, even though on the macro level, they could show a lot of achievements. On the micro level, like many other places in the world, your wallet is getting thinner and thinner and your bank account is getting smaller and smaller. That's the reality all over the world. But when it comes to elections and campaigns, no one sits there and says, well, it's better in Brazil or worse in Belgium, and makes their assessments according to that. You make your assessment according to how you feel. And if someone tells you, I'll do a better job, then you may well believe them. So it's very hard to say exactly what a Netanyahu-led government will do, a future one. But what we do know is 13 years of Netanyahu-led government. And on certain issues, there wasn't too much difference. As I said, on issues like religion and state, because for the first time in a while, the ultra-Orthodox were not in the government. So there was quite a big change. But on issues like security, on economy, or on even construction, this government could argue that it did quite a lot. I'm sure the next government will also try to match that, if not go further. So we'll hear a lot in the months to come. I do predict, as I did last week, that these elections will be more about personalities. They'll be more about threats and sort of scaring the other side. The center-left bloc will be, talking about how Itamar Ben-Gvir will become a minister, and you have to save Israel from Itamar Ben-Gvir, whereas the right will use Ahmed Tibi and Mansour Abbas to say we have to save our country from that. So I sadly for the Israeli public, I don't see us really going deep into the details of policy issues. It'll be more personality based. It'll be more slogan based, just as it has been. Very divisive elections, I believe, will be ahead of us. Perhaps some of the sting of that will be taken out because of Bennett's decision today. But still, Israeli elections have got more and more divisive, because when the numbers are so close, you'll do everything to get a few more thousand votes here or there.
Thank you. Stuart Broaddus states, I've read that the visa waiver proposal of the Biden administration would affect security screening of Palestinians using Ben Gurion Airport, perhaps degrading safety standards. What are the arguments on both sides of this issue?
Well, that was one of the things that the Americans talked about. Israelis certainly, are unabashedly do screen people coming into the country. That's how they do security here. And, there's a pretty good record on security. Apparently, I just saw that they may actually even pass the Knesset dispersal law even tonight. I just saw that come up now. So who knows? But on the visa waiver, yes, that's certainly one of the issues. The Americans do not want American Palestinians or Americans of Palestinian descent to be singled out. And Israel, not that Israel singles them out, but certainly they do their due diligence, and they let's say they're more careful with them. I don't think Israel will give up on that for the visa waiver, and I think they'll find a happy medium on that. So I can't really say much more than that, because there are negotiations going on. But I'm sure Israel, whichever government it is, whether it's this government or the next government, will not do anything to harm the security of Israel or tourists to Israel.
Thank you. And do you believe that the coalition government will concede to the October 25th election date to get the laws passed?
Or the opposition want the October 25th? You mean will the coalition concede? I guess it all depends how much they want it. At the end of the day, it's a simple equation. Do you want these laws to pass, giving the opposition, a leg up, meaning that their bloc, the supporters of their bloc, will get out in even greater numbers than perhaps they would otherwise? It seems if they are going to try and vote on the dispersal law tonight, now they're talking about 12 o'clock tonight, which is an hour and a half away. It could be that there is a breakthrough on that date. It could be that those who are pushing the metro law and some of the other bills are going to say, at the end of the day, those are more important. So it's a game of chicken at the moment. Whoever blinks first gets what they want. And it depends who wants what they want more, and giving the other side a victory, whether it's a victory of achievement or whether it's a victory in ensuring that its bloc will get more of a voter turnout come the elections.
Thank you so much. And with that, we've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you again for taking time to update us this week.
Absolutely.
For our viewers and listeners, please join us Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern for a webinar with Shoshana Johnston discussing Trans Men at Oberlin College. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day.